Hello and welcome to my review of The Adventures of Lord Iffy Boatrace, a 1990 novel from Bruce Dickinson. Yes, the Bruce Dickinson, who's more famous for bursting eardrums as the vocalist of Britain's biggest rock band, the legendary Iron Maiden. Quite what it was that made a publisher take a punt on an unknown author with just millions and millions of record sales behind them, we may never know. But putting that aside for a moment, what's the book about? Well, it is, in a fairly loose sense of the word, a sort of Tom Sharp farce, but the sheer frenetic energy of this book is why I say a fairly loose sense. The themes of repressed or excessively indulged sexual appetites is certainly prevalent, but if Sharp moves the needle towards poor taste, Dickinson, or Iffy Boatrace, our protagonist anyway, he pulls the needle out and pokes it where the sun doesn't shine. This book is purely for those who like things in very poor taste, and in modern times the sensitive would be well advised to read something else. Iffy Boatrace is an English lord who likes to dress his top half like an aristocrat, his bottom half in women's clothing, and especially their shoes. He is, like most of the aristocracy, bankrupt, but owner of a large estate he can't afford. His plan to resolve this is to generate cash by opening grouse shooting all the year round, the problem being that there aren't any grouse on his estate. Via his neighbour, former Wing Commander Bill Symes Grote, whose estate is his excuse for abusing small boys who he names after Nazis, Grote connects Boatrace with a mysterious military man who always appears in disguise. There he is, SAS, Borneo, Malaya, Northern Ireland, Oman, explosives, gun, knives, cheese wire, poison, you name it, he'll kill it. A master of disguise and concealment, the very soul of discretion. Though nothing in that resume suggests he's the man for the job, Boatrace employs the soldier to build him a flock of robot grouse, even though he has no money to pay him. Then Boatrace arranges for his butler to invite some old public school chums to the estate to test them out. The butler isn't convinced by the scheme, and he has his own invention that he thinks will be a better money spinner, the Pelvatron, literally a sex machine that moves around on caterpillar tracks and has a piston for a penis. The guests arrive and are picked up by a taxi driven by none other than Eddie. I was kind of glad there weren't too many nods and winks to Iron Maiden, and the least subtle one appears here. The taxi sat outside, Iron Maiden blasting out of the driver's side window. Eddie's manic thrashing around and violent accosting of the group that he's taking to the estate is kind of irritating. It makes little sense, and it goes on for far too long, and I was glad that as a more casual listener I didn't get any further involvement from the band or their mascot. Though that just renders this Eddie interlude all the more baffling, and one begins to wonder if the publishers insisted on it in an attempt to tap that lucrative fan base. Later on, one of the guests is listening to the beat of a dreadful anonymous American rock band, apparently not being cool enough to listen to Maiden, even of the Blaze Bayley years. The guests are a largely interchangeable, unlikable bunch of jerks. There's Roderick and his insufferable Karen of a wife Margot, who's the sort of shrill, eco-crusading feminist that is always a joy to read. She has a catchphrase, it's "arg", a all-circumstances noise she uses when she's angry, irritated or in pain. She has no other emotions. There's Brian and his wife, the insatiable, buxom American Letitia. Mark West has a large penis, so much so that he leaves stalactites on the ceiling when he masturbates. The reason he is, taking care of business is that he has a wife called Cynthia, who is also apparently insatiable, just not with him, preferring to sleep with a transsexual in the sort of portrayal that in 2023 would be a guaranteed cancelling, though Dickinson may well be able to claim enough capital to be J.K. Rowling Teflon. Mark has a catchphrase, he did still vaguely love her, which he uses every time he represses one of his homicidal urges towards her. To be fair, that isn't unamusing when it crops up in the text. The only downside is that every reader wants him to act on it. When the crowd eventually does arrive at Iffy's estate, Margot decides that it's time for a masturbation, and Iffy's butler decides that her sex toy would be a suitable addition for the Pelvatron, so he steals it. Cynthia spots the butler and decides to seduce him. He has erectile dysfunction, so he sets the Pelvatron on her. Neglecting to fill its ball sacks with the required ejaculate, however, means that it will never be able to stop. Eventually it crashes out of the building, with Cynthia still impaled, and races across the estate, sinking into the surrounding swamp, Cynthia included. There the swamp water fills the required reservoirs and achieves its climax. Yes, I just explained that on YouTube. Mark, witnessing this spectacle though, thinks he's seen a ghost. He also then stumbles on a poacher's lair which contains the remains of an Eddie costume. At the estate everyone has dinner, Iffy explains about the grouse shoot, and Margot naturally protests. Letitia tries and fails to seduce Iffy, but the soldier, in disguise as the stuffed body of his uncle, takes care of business. Semi-necrophilia with a semi, hopefully being the limit of the poor taste of the book. Brian, though, decides to go to the pub for a drink. The pub explodes, killing him and the publican. The next day, our survivors go shooting the soldier's robot grouse. Margot has a gun too, and she intends to sabotage the event, but she stumbles into a booby trap and is killed. Moved by the death of Margot, Letitia tries to seduce Roderick. Instead, her oversized memories kill him. Letitia is then traumatized until she discovers Mark's penis. He's concerned if he is trying to kill them until he discovers Letitia's memories. But it turns out he's a little too big, even for her, and she dies in the act. Iffy, finding her body, blames Mark for all of the deaths. Mark flees and Iffy and the butler give chase, with Iffy driving even though he doesn't know how to, which is hilarious. No, honestly, hilarious. However, his inability to drive does save them because the soldier has left a mine in the road and they'd surely have hit it if he could. The soldier then reveals himself as Albert Boatrace, who intends to bump off Iffy in order to become Lord himself, believing that under the manor's floor is an old Spanish treasure. While standing in the mined road explaining his plan, he's run over by the Pelvatron, which then hits the mine. Iffy and Butler retire home, dig up the treasure, and find their uncle has spent it all. Cynthia returns, and believing the butler responsible for the efforts of the Pelvatron, she tries to seduce him, and that is where the book ends. Like I said at the start, not exactly Tom Sharp. At least, Sharp knows the meaning of subtlety. Dickinson dials things up until the dial is broken, unreadable, and unfixable. There is no subject he won't scrape, in mostly vain efforts to find some amusement, including this line from early on. Iffy was quite horrified at the idea of this lecherous old man buggering his way through the local adolescent population, but being an English aristocrat, and therefore a pervert himself, he decided to take a more pragmatic approach. Few of the jokes or situations land, and mostly what I was experiencing while reading it was irritation. Too many annoying characters, few of them supporting much in the way of a characteristic, and a plot that is just a frenetic scramble from one scene to the next. The book desperately needs someone, anyone who isn't the loon, to root for, a sane eye to report on the chaos. It doesn't have one. Failing that, just less people might help some of those that are in it already be more than a one-note gag. When people started dying, I was just wishing they'd get on with killing the others as well. At a scant 150 pages, this still feels quite long. That said, I can't deny that the book made me laugh out loud, which is extremely rare when reading prose. And it did it more than once. The first time was when the butler was remembering a spell in prison, serving as the valet to the notorious killer called Slasher. Bizarrely aroused by being ordered around, in this instance to make the tea, Slasher notices his discomfort. "You've got a fucking bunk on," coughed Slasher indignantly. "You're pouring my tea with a fucking stalk on." Personally, I've always thought that it was stalk, not stalk, that describes somebody standing to attention. However, as ridiculous as this is, I really can't put a finger on why it sent me chuckling. Perhaps I'm just that juvenile. Highbrow, it is not. This is followed up by Letitia's attempts to seduce the black British rail porter Methuselah on the train to Scotland. She asks, "Where does one go pee-pees?" whined Letitia, flashing her drilled, filed, flattened, plated, crowned and very expensive teeth. "In de Kazi, ma'am," croaked Methuselah. "I mean de toilet." To this point, it works, though this is unnecessary, and when it continues like this, you fluff the joke. In America, we call it the restroom. "I don't think you want to sleep in there, ma'am." Worse is to come with this, which may be because I've been working in schools too long, but this isn't just poor taste, it's just poor. "Go down on me, you Zulu, you. Pierce me with your assegai, spear me with your woolly wamira, you gorgeous spear chucker, and when you skewer me on your rod of iron, leave your hat on. You're fucking balmy. I'm from Walthamstow." Now, I really like this punchline, but how can you set up this joke, which relies on Methuselah being normal and everyday, and then write his dialogues in phonetics like this? Recalling her attempts to seduce Methuselah, Letitia accuses him of rape, and the line on screen appears in this book, making that the second of the limits of poor taste we've reached. And so much so that perhaps it has that kind of South Park energy where nothing is off limits, but the South Park crew usually land their jokes with a degree of elan, or at least zeal. They also have something this novel doesn't, something that just feels real and likeable. Most episodes too have a story that is recognisable as one, and the knowledge that calm moments accentuate the frenetic, the real accentuates the zany. Everything being dialed to ridiculous all the time just gets exhausting. In conclusion, while Dickinson might think he's written a Sharp-esque farce, or even predated South Park with a no-holds-barred satire of British aristocracy that tests the very limits of good taste, but what he's actually written is closer to a porn parody of a carry-on film. The Adventures of Iffy Boatrace definitely push the limits of taste, but also of patience. It's very short, but it feels long, with not just a number of scenes dragging on too long, especially Eddie's cameo, but also jokes that drag on too long, as mentioned before. This story is pointless as well. However, what do you want from a comedy? Does a single solitary chuckle mean that you have achieved the goals of the genre? If so, then The Adventures of Lord Iffy Boatrace is an unqualified success. If your qualifications are a little higher than that, then it is a failure on all counts. My books, if you're interested, are available on Amazon. Thanks for watching, and like and subscribe for more like this.
My name is Riley and I'm a student. The first 2 weeks at Sexington University were perfectly normal. I was drunk until the end of freshers when my student loan ran out. Then Professor Lovecraft exploded his lab and my eyebrows and everything changed. My roommate started dying. Aliens invaded. I killed a dragon over breakfast, got stranded in the past and attacked by dinosaurs. I might have committed a genocide. I might have robbed an empire. I may even have saved the world. I really hope next week is quieter. I have an assignment due.